أعوذ بالله الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Before the break, we were talking about the classification of disasters, and we said that disasters can be classified into three. Number one, based on the origin, and based on the origin, we said that disasters can either be natural or man-made. Then number two, based on the speed, we say that the disaster can be rapid onset or low onset. The last classification of the disaster, it is based on the scale. A disaster sometimes can affect a small area, the local, just a small area. And in this case, this disaster can be managed by the local resources. Now, number two is the regional. So this regional disaster, it affects multiple communities or districts. So for example, in Somalia, if you have 4, 5, 6, 7 districts, all of the districts or 3, 4, 5 of them are affected. The national, its widespread consequences require substantial central government and institutional support. So when you're talking of national scale, the whole of Somali, in this case, has been affected by the disaster. So that is at a national scale. Then lastly, the disaster sometimes can be international. And in this case, this is where the disaster is known as a pandemic. So it affects multiple countries, just like the case of Corona. So Corona actually affected all the countries globally. They were suffering. So that is the classification of disasters based on the scale. So one thing we have to know is that the bigger the scale, the larger the amount of resources we are going to need. So disaster at a local level cannot be compared to a disaster at an international level. A disaster at an international level needs a lot of resources, needs a lot of coordination, needs a lot of planning. All the stakeholders needs to be engaged. Now, on to the next part. Now, what causes disaster? It is just related to what we were talking now. So we have the natural causes. We've talked about it, the earthquake. We've talked about the rains. We've talked about the volcanoes. Then also the human causes. We've talked about the human causes. Poor planning. Because our planning is not good. Our roads are not well planned for. Our houses are not well planned for, then we are going to experience disaster. Socio-economic causes. Sometimes there is the issue of poverty and inequality, raise vulnerability. For example, poor housing. The Masakin, they live in pathetic condition and they are vulnerable. So the economic condition, the social status of people also can be a cause of what? Can be a cause of disaster. Then lastly, you have the institutional causes. So we have weak institutions in our countries. So even in some countries, we don't have the department for disaster management. And if we are having those departments, then we have people who are not competent who are leading those departments. And if we are having those departments, they don't have enough budget. They are crippled. And because of that, they don't function effectively and efficiently. So the weak institutions can also be a cause of disaster. Now, another important thing we have to discuss is what is known as what basically the 6 factors that make disaster situation different. What makes disaster situations to be very special? What makes disaster situation to be unique? هناك البعض الخصائص، هناك بعض المميزات. So when you're talking about this مميزات, number one is uncertainty. So it is very difficult to predict when a disaster is going to happen. من الصعب التنبؤ بوقوع الكوارث. It's very difficult to predict when, matter, where, المكان, and how, كيف, and how severe disasters will be. It's difficult. So it's very difficult to know when, where, and how this disaster can be managed. It's very difficult. Number two, urgency. During disaster, we cannot sleep. We need to react quickly. So decision must be made within minutes or hours, not days or weeks. This is why managing disaster is very special. We need to be very proactive. We need to be very fast. We need to be very fast in our coordination during the time of disaster. So there is the element of urgency. Number three, high risk. During the time of disaster, al-makhatir دائما تكون كثير. So people, infrastructure, equipment, and services are simultaneously endangered. So there is a high chance that during disaster, people are going to die, our infrastructure and equipment are going to be damaged, then the services are going to be cut. The power supply, the food supply, the medical supply. So there is a high chance that these services are going to be interrupted. Then resource constraints. Normally when we are dealing with what disasters, we are dealing in the reality that this disaster, we don't have enough budget. And this is what normally happens. We normally don't have enough budget. That is why during the time of disaster, we are going to call the United Nations. We are going to call the World Bank. We are going to call the Red Cross. We are going to call the Qatar Charity Khairiyah. Why? Because a country alone cannot manage a disaster. Multiple stakeholders. During the time of disaster, we need to coordinate, we need to communicate with different people, different departments. So the government, the non-governmental organization, communities, donors, contractors, and health bodies are all involved. Everybody has a role to play. The government, they have a role to play. The NGOs, they have a role to play. The donors, they have a role to play. So there is this multiple stakeholder engagement. Then lastly, rapidly changing conditions. During the time of disasters, conditions change quickly. So floods, road closure, resource shortages, health emergency. هناك الأشياء كثيرا تحدث في نفس الزمن. And that is why you need a very good leader when it comes to dealing with disasters. Now, another important thing is why project managers need knowledge in disaster management. So, for example, you are a student of project management. So somebody might be asking, Limada, Nadrus Hadihi, why are we doing this disaster management? Why should we know? Is it important for us in project management? Yes, it is very important. Because we normally have projects, and these projects, most of the times, they are affected by the disasters. So project managers, they need to have some knowledge about how to manage disasters. They need to have that skill. That's why it's very important for the project managers and those and students to know, to at least the project management students to at least have some basic understanding, have a foundation in disaster management. So projects can be affected by disaster. هذا شيء عادي, normal thing. We have our project, and this project can be affected by disasters. And some projects are specifically created to respond to disasters. وكذلك there are some projects that have been created to respond to disasters. So project managers need basic knowledge to manage risk, respond effectively, and support recovery. So number one, we have what is known as risk identification. So project managers need to identify hazards that may threaten a project. أنا كالمدير المشروع, I need to be in a position to know, ya jama, these are some of the hazards, disasters that can affect my project. I need to identify. That is the first thing. Once I identify, I can plan on how to reduce. This is the risk reduction. So risk reduction comes after identifying the risk. Then now you can, as a manager, you can come with approaches and strategies that will help to reduce the risk you have identified. Then after that, you can prepare. You prepare for the risk so that it does not affect your project. You prepare, then at the same time, you make decisions that will affect there is what is known as the effective response. For the effective response, you need to make decisions, quick decisions. As a project manager, you need to mobilize resources, you need to coordinate teams and maintain critical project activities during a disaster. في أثناء الكارثة. Then also as a project manager, you need to resource management. You need to manage the resources that you are having during the time of a disaster. You have the human resource, you have the physical resources, you have the financial resources. So you have to manage all these resources. Also, stakeholder coordination. As a project manager, you have to be very good during the time of disaster to coordinate, to communicate with the stakeholders, the government, the NGOs, the donors, the community, the health practitioners, ila ghayri dhalik. Then continuity of project. You need to develop a plan, a contingency plan that will enable you to continue with your project even during the time of the disaster. So the disaster should not force you or should not actually affect the project in any way. Then, of course, lastly, we have the recovery and reconstruction. You, as a project manager, you have a role to play after, post-disaster. So project management and disaster management are interrelated and they are interdependent. Now, examples of disaster management projects. So sometimes during a disaster, you can have emergency shelter project. Now, ya Jama, there is a disaster, there is an earthquake. This earthquake has destroyed the houses of people. Now you come with a project, emergency shelter project. So the emergency shelter project is there, temporary house for those people whose houses have been damaged and destroyed. Hospital rehabilitation project. There can also be a separate project which deals with hospital rehabilitation project. During an earthquake, maybe the hospital gets damaged. So you need to come with a project to rehabilitate the hospital so that it gets back to, so that it becomes fully functional. Then you can also have water supply recovery projects. So after a disaster, you normally have a lot of projects that will enable people to recover, people to recover back to their normal life. Now, the 9 key project management knowledge areas in disaster management. So as a project management student, I think you are familiar with all these areas. These areas, you have studied it in project management. For example, what is a project scope, project schedule, cost, risk, resources, procurement, stakeholders, communication, quality. So these project management areas, they are also related to disaster management, you know? So for example, the scope defines what the disaster project will and will not deliver. So in any project, you have the deliverables that needs to be delivered at the end of the project. The schedule is all about the time limit. Every project has a beginning and it has an end. You know, the cost, every project has a cost. And as a project manager, you have to always ensure that you are within the budget. You also have to manage the risk in any project because the risk will affect the scope, and at the same time, it will also affect the cost, and it will also affect the quality. So all these things are related to disaster management. Now, what is the role of the project manager now as we finalize? What is the role of the project manager in disaster management? Number one, as the project manager, you have to identify the risk. The risk manager. You need to identify all the risks that can affect a given project. Number two, you need to coordinate. When you're talking about coordination, you're talking coordinate. Who are we coordinating with? All the stakeholders. You as the project manager, you need to coordinate with all of them. Also, as a project manager, you are responsible to make decisions during disasters. All the people are waiting for you. So as a project manager, you have to have some skills in making decisions during the time of disasters. Then the stakeholder manager. This one is related to coordinator. So you need to identify all the stakeholders, their interest, their influence, and their expectations. Then also the safety manager. You have to ensure that the people who are working with you are safe. The equipment that you are working with is safe. You have to be a good planner. You have to be a good resource manager, managing all the resources. A good project manager should also be good in communication, giving accurate information, and quality manager. A good project manager should always ensure that they focus with quality. Quality always comes first. Then monitoring and evaluation. When you're talking about monitoring and evaluation, as you are continuing, as you are managing your project, as you are delivering the deliverables, you should always be evaluating to ensure that you have to evaluate to ensure that work is being done per the objectives and per the standard that was set. That is the meaning of. So monitoring and evaluation help us to identify our weaknesses, and if we identify our weaknesses, we can be able to come with measures earlier, And also, there are some competencies and ethical responsibilities that you need to have also as a project manager. So that is the end of our lesson. Is there any question? So if there is any question, you can ask. You can just review the lesson during your free time. Is there any question? So I need to take the attendance. The attendance for. Don't leave without I'm taking a picture of the attendance. So we shall be having 4 lessons every Friday. So for the next 4 Fridays, we shall be having our lessons. So every lesson has 5 marks attendance. So if you miss any lesson, you miss the 5 you miss the 5 marks for attendance. Then I shall also give you, because we have a lot and we cannot cover all the areas in 4 weeks. It will be very difficult. So you'll be expected either to write a research or you'll be given a comprehensive quiz. So I will decide. When I decide, I will let you know, inshallah. So that's the end of our lesson. I have a YouTube channel. I will record. I will share the what? I will share. You will find this lesson in my YouTube channel, inshallah. I will share the link in our WhatsApp group, inshallah. So, is there any question before we leave? Okay, if there is no question, we'll meet next week, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khair.